Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Akio, and for today's episode, we have a real thought provoking one. We cover purpose, ethics, values, as well as the recent layoffs of big tech companies. Joining me today is Dorothea Baur. She's a strategy ethics consultant and loves controversial questions. I'll put all her socials in the description below. Check her out, and with that being said, enjoy the episode.
Beyond coding.
How often do you go to the mountains? Because I've been to Switzerland twice, and we don't have mountains here, and I love going to the mountains.
Well, according to the Dutch definition of mountains, I probably go to the mountains every day. according according to Swiss definition of mountains, I don't go there often enough. So maybe once a month.
Once a
But I
month.
should go more often.
Yeah, especially if there's like this gloomy cloud. I went to Italy during Christmas because my girlfriend's half Italian. We went to her family, and we were also, it felt like stuck in a cloud. And then when we went up the mountain, all of a sudden it was sunny, and I didn't know what was happening. I'd never experienced that before.
This is like, we call it the sea of fog, the
Really?
Nebelmeer.
That's the
And
term?
it's like a sea, because it's like a sea. You look down on the sea of fog where you feel you could just jump in it. Well,
Yeah.
you shouldn't,
No.
because the landing will be very hard. but it's amazing, and when you're underneath the blanket, you can't imagine that over the blanket above it is such a beautiful world. It's like two worlds in one place.
Yeah, and it's so like, I felt like it was doom and gloom, like, and it didn't look sunny at
Yeah.
all until, as you
Yeah.
mentioned, like we drove up and we were above the
Yeah.
clouds, and I was
Yeah.
like, the only time I've done this was like I'm in a plane, and then you can see it.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. No, this is always what we need to remember when we suffer down here under this blanket. We need to know it's not that far. You just need to find a way to go through the clouds or through the fog, and you will be in a beautiful world. So
Yeah,
it's really
but
nice.
is that normal, like in December-ish, like fall and winter always?
You say December-ish. It's November, December, January, February, but it has become a bit less intense and less persistent thanks to climate change. They say this is going to help us with that at least.
Yeah.
So because it's really a lot of people really suffer from a lack of daylight, but it must be even worse in the Netherlands because it's so dark,
Yeah,
and
it's
you just don't get the vitamin D, etc.
it's a bit different. Like right now, or previously, it used to rain more often, and now it rains less often, but harder in a way. So you
Yeah,
have really hard,
yeah.
really harsh rain.
Becomes more extreme.
It's more
Yeah.
extreme, and then also
Yeah.
randomly we would have sun in I don't know. It felt like we skipped fall last year, where it just went from summer to winter real quick.
Yeah. It's not that like the regular cycle doesn't really happen anymore. It's
No.
almost like a bit unpredictable. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Sure.
I feel older and
Yeah.
older when I say like it didn't used to be like that.
Yeah. Well, I don't even want to talk about myself. I'm feeling old these days.
No worries, we won't dive into that. No worries. But what do you do now more on a day-to-day basis? Do you have like lots of clients you work with?
Yeah. Well, this January is often quite slow as a self-employed person because businesses don't really give away their jobs, etc. But this year I had a really intense start into January. I was busy defining sustainability targets for an insurance company, and that was really quite intense process because we have like defined 8 topics that are material for them,
Yeah.
which means that they really have to pay attention from a risk management point of view and from an impact point of view. And so now we have to set goals that are kind of smart, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound.
Yeah.
So I had to go through these targets together with my client. It was quite intense. And I also was invited by a multi-stakeholder initiative, partnership on AI, to make suggestions on how to disseminate their new code of conduct for the development, deployment, and use of synthetic media,
Wow.
which is really, really timely. Now that, it's mostly video and audio based, like deep fakes and fake pictures, etc. So it's not that much about ChatGPT, which everyone, including myself, is using now. But it's very timely, really. Because just now this week I read that CNET, this platform, this tech news platform, has revealed that they had been creating a lot of content with AI, with the help of AI, and even though they said there was always a human editor in the loop, it turned out to be very inaccurate, the information that they gave. In many cases, the articles that have been created by their AI application were not correct. And even more so, they now found out that a lot of it was semi-plagiarized. So it was they were plagiarizing without knowing it. Of course, AI just took its thoughts or its words rather from wherever it had been trained.
Yeah.
And so now I think they had to retract a lot of articles. So and that's also synthetic media. If you think as a news platform, you can, use AI to generate your content, even if you are open about it and you make remarks saying like this has been, created with the help of AI, but this person, and then you have a real person, is responsible for the accuracy of the content.
Yeah.
It turned out that humans, like journalists, are not made for this type of role because they will never pay as much attention to the AI generated content as if they wrote it themselves.
Exactly. It's a different.
Yeah.
Is that like if you plagiarize in that way, are you then responsible as the person that created it or generated it?
These questions, according to my knowledge, but I'm not a lawyer, they're still open and undecided. But there's a huge discussion starting about intellectual property and the whole plagiarism, because someone needs to be responsible.
Exactly.
Obviously.
Yeah. And you can't really say, well, the AI did it, so it's not my responsibility. But also, you won't know where it got the information from, so you're acting not knowingly.
Yeah, well, that's part of, I think, what the EU AI Act wants to tackle. Like, who should be responsible? Is it the creator of the AI application, like the vendor, or is it the user? And so, do you, as a user, do you need to have full transparency over the value chain of the AI?
Yeah.
Where does it come from? Just like you have with, bananas. Oh, they come from Colombia. They have been trained on that plantation in Colombia. So, will you have to know as a user of AI application, oh, this AI application has been trained on a data set from, this year or these years, covering these years from these platforms? Or is it okay, or is the vendor liable for mistakes or also plagiarizing that could be created by AI? Yeah. But as I said, I'm not fully up to date with the legal questions, and it's not really my core competence. But regardless of how the law will regulate these questions, from an ethical point of view, it's anyway, it's relevant. It's relevant.
Absolutely. I can imagine there's going to be so much gray area, like even regardless of what the law says, right? Because the law is absolutely black and white in some aspect, but on an ethical sense, I guess it's a lot of gray area. How would I describe kind of your role? Because is it an ethics consultant? Is that doing it justice, or how would you describe like what you do on a day-to-day?
Well, I think on day-to-day basis, I would even go as far as say I'm an ethics strategy consultant.
Yeah.
Because strategy is important. If you say you're an ethics consultant, people think you will only help them with ethics, which is of course a good thing. But I mean, let's be realistic. I can only make money, and I also find it meaningful if I link ethics to strategic questions.
Yeah.
And some people feel like there is a contradiction between ethics and strategy, that ethics can never be strategically oriented, and it's a bad thing to kind of, abuse ethics for strategy.
Yeah.
But, I'm not in academia anymore, and I don't have to stick to a rigorous doctrine or like a rigorous mindset. I have this flexibility to kind of mix different worlds, and so ethics, like from really in an academic sense and the reality of businesses, I can combine the two and see what's best for my client. So ethics strategy consultant is right.
Interesting. How do you combine, because ethics is for me, it's hard to define and it's not really tangible. How do you define that or combine that with strategy? Like, do you have an example of that?
Well, it's really what I said is like, a business is about value creation, mostly, I mean, first of all, or like in economic sense. So you create value by giving advice to clients, other people or other businesses create value by, producing food, whatever it is, product or service. So now how can you make sure that this economic value creation is aligned with ethical values, and which ethical values is it aligned with.
Yeah.
So what are the predominant ethical values that guide your business decisions? Because even if you think you don't have any, we're just doing, our job, we're just earning money, implicitly you always make ethical judgments. So I help clients to become aware of the hidden ethics or implicit ethical assumptions that are underlying their business models, and I help them kind of flag them out and make sure that they're transparent about their, we call it normative assumption, like about how things should be. And this is kind of what I have to do, because it's also nowadays it's an expectation also from stakeholders that your business, is clear or takes a stance or positions themselves on questions that go way beyond merely economic or business questions.
Yeah, but are they? So I hear what you're saying. I still have a hard time kind of finding an example. Like the company I'm working with
Okay.
has values. They call them values, and I wonder how close they are to ethics, right? Because one of them is people first. The second one is knowledge sharing. We have quality without compromise, and we have customer intimacy. Those are the main 4 pillars.
Yeah. Okay.
How are those like strongly connected to ethics in that way?
So first is knowledge sharing, customer intimacy, and what
People
is it? The
first.
other? People first. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and quality without compromise.
Okay. So what would I expect in terms of, let's say, an ethics strategy from such a company? If it's like people first and customer intimacy, if you then suddenly fully automate customer service, if you only have call centers or like chatbots, etc., and human in the loop cannot be reached anymore, that would be, in my opinion, like a violation of your self-proclaimed values.
Yeah.
So it's a real commitment to human interaction, and it means that even though you're, as far as I know, an IT consulting company,
Yeah.
you're like a totally different set of values will be automation at scale, maximum efficiency, and I don't know, whatever other value you could think of.
Yeah.
So I would expect a totally different kind of strategy evolving from such values than from the values you just claimed.
Interesting.
And yeah, recently I was talking to real estate agents about sustainability strategy, overarching sustainability strategy, and then I read about their value sets. And so one of the companies also had something like solid and I don't know, solidaric, etc.
Yeah.
And then I said, well, okay, if these are your values as a company, and this is how you treat your employees, as with solidarity, etc., I also expect you to kind of build houses or engage in building projects that mirror these values.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of translate your values that you have in your company that you use for your engagement with your employees, also with your other stakeholders. You can't have a totally different set of values that guide your behavior within your company and outside your company towards your clients.
I get that. Like I can have good examples of where like those values would translate on a more day-to-day business and in every aspect of the sense, right? In the employee sense or more on a customer or consultancy basis. Are those the ethics of a company then, or do they translate into something else that are then the ethics? Like I still have a hard line dividing the values and ethics in that way.
Well, I mean, the values are just like the words that have been chosen by the company to kind of position themselves. It's also a lot about branding, about, being an attractive employer, whatever thoughts are behind. It's not always explicitly driven by ethical considerations. But ethics of a company always kind of can be assembled, first of all, by your core business. So how do you do your core business? I would say a clothing brand like Patagonia has a totally different ethical approach towards textile production than, for example, I'm saying Primark. And I don't want to shame anyone.
Sure.
But of course, if you're talking about fast fashion or you're talking about eco-conscious outdoor fashion, that's a totally different ethical approach to how you handle resources, how you deal with your value chain, your supply chain, etc. So the core business is one thing where you can kind of derive ethics, where you can identify, ethical assumptions that guide your business, choices you make there. But then also the whole like corporate culture that you have, how you, as I say, like how you engage with your employees, what kind of remuneration system do you have, not just for the board and for the management, but also for your employees. You have employee shares, etc. All these are like ethical decisions that you take. Like,
Yeah.
what is it worth for us as a company to have these employees? How do we show appreciation? And so all these little things together, they kind of create the ethics of a company. But then again, it's never a uniform ethical position in a
Yeah.
company, because company is made of people, and it's often heavily influenced, like the at least the tone from the top, like the current CEO or the current board will always have an impact on ethics. The messages they spread will always shape ethics. So there can also be changes in values, or like changes in how you do business ethically, more or less ethically, as soon as there is a change on the top of the company. But so overall, it's your core business, the choices you make there, what you emphasize, how you source and how you sell, and then your like corporate culture, which is to a certain degree independent from your core business.
Interesting. I wonder how
Yeah.
much awareness kind of helps in that process. Because as you mentioned, you didn't, like you pointed them out, but I didn't know those were ethical questions, right? But as you go about them, I can see how there's ethics in place there. But the people making those decisions, I'm not aware, or if they are aware, that those are ethical questions, right? That they have to ask themselves. I think a lot of people do that unknowingly, and they make those decisions based on their intuition. And obviously, those are kind of founded within their roots in a way of working, or where they come from, or what they've experienced in that way. But they are still ethical
Yes.
decisions.
Yes, it's often like this mindset. Either it's like intuition,
Mm.
but I mean, in a business context, you don't talk about the intuition. You don't say, "Oh, it's my gut feeling." It's not like really. You often say things like, "We are forced by the market.
Yeah.
Competition forces us." So you pretend that you're not responsible and you don't have any wiggle room
Mm.
there. And so these are often excuses, not in a bad way, but or like a lack of awareness, and also this like there is no alternative mindset. Oftentimes you do have room for maneuver, and you can change things, but of course there are certain like hard restrictions, like budget, etc. But even within that, how you allocate your resources, says something about your priorities and what you value most.
Yeah.
And this is something I really like. That's also when I, for example, talk about sustainability with my clients. I don't talk about tons of CO2 right from the beginning. First, I ask them, what does sustainability mean for you? And then some people say, oh, sustainability is resource efficiency, or it is circular economy, and they come with a technical concept.
Mm.
And others say, oh no, sustainability is solidarity with future generations, etc. So you see how the same concept can be interpreted as an entirely technical concept by some people, or as like a heavily ethics laden concept by
Yeah.
other people.
I think that's really challenging. Like even the notion of what is fair, right? Even let's say you're in an organization and you all have the same manager, they're gonna treat you differently based on other people, and those other people might think that's fair or unfair. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because I don't think there's a hard line, and it's black and white. Like it feels very much gray. What would be fair in that case? Even like the sustainability aspect, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I think when we're dealing with people, people can try to be fair, and you have procedures, you have standards, but
Yeah.
of course there's always a human element which is moody and unpredictable, and I might have a secret, a hidden preference for certain people over others. So, but there, of course, it's important to have standards in place, and resources for like taking recourse, like how you say, remedy,
Yeah.
etc. If your rights get violated. But that's also what makes it so difficult when we're trying to delegate processes, or we're delegating a lot of decision-making processes to tech.
Yeah.
Then there is no room for discussion about whether a decision has been fair. The decision is made by a computer program, and you just take it or leave it.
That's
But you
it.
often don't know how it has been taken. You can't argue with an AI application,
Yeah.
and that's, people think it's more fair because a computer is neutral. But as we all know, someone trains an algorithm, someone defines what parameters go into the algorithm, what training set we use, etc. So this is like a tension. Nothing can relieve us from ethical responsibility.
Yeah.
In the end, it's always us, like humans, responsible for these matters.
Yeah, I think also like looking at a brand perspective, I watch a lot of Shark Tank, and what I see more
Yeah,
so is that people invest more so in brands rather than the products they sell sometimes. Like it could be a good product, but a lot of companies can have a good product. And then what they do as a company, besides just building that product, all of a sudden matters more, right? If we have a company that really advocates for sustainability and they sell clothes, and they can say, oh, for X amount of sales, we plant a tree somewhere, right, to give back. All of a sudden, people look at that brand and are like, okay, I can see myself behind that. And that's then kind of a strategy aspect of that.
yeah. There's a lot of PR in
Yeah.
sustainability, and to a certain degree, I find it okay. I don't find it bad to try to make money with or from ethical actions. I don't say it's per se something that I totally criticize.
Yeah.
But at the same time, of course, as you say, like planting trees and just yeah, we're close to the whole greenwashing discussion there. If
Yeah.
you can just liberate yourself from your responsibility by planting trees where you have no control over how fast they grow, where they grow, and it doesn't really make up for all the emissions you're like maybe unnecessarily creating in your production process. So that's a bit of a delicate example. The planting trees is a bit overused,
Yeah.
but still, as you say, it is. There's a lot of like brand value that's kind of decoupled from products. And I appreciate and I find it okay if authentic sustainability increases the value of a brand. That's kind of desirable, of
Yeah, I
course.
like I like that you add
Yeah.
it having to be authentic, right? Because if
Yes.
it's like forced, then if it's used in kind of a finagly way to gain attention in that way, because it is PR, right? It should be positive
Yeah.
PR and authentic
Yes.
PR. Otherwise, I
Yes.
also don't think it's sustainable. At some point,
No.
something's going to shine through, and that will catapult back into the negativity then. Yeah.
Yes.
But the hard part is, I
Yes.
think, for me, what I would see as organization, if you don't really are aware of like the ethical decisions that you make, or even those guidelines that you have in place, or more so boundaries, what is like being aware of those ethical decisions? Like, what would it add to an organization? All of a sudden, being more so aware of the ethics that are in an organization, rather than the opposite of them acting unknowingly.
Well, it certainly reduces the risk of violating anyone's rights. Of
Mm.
course, it's like from a risk management perspective, that's very like technical speaking, and it's strategic speaking. But it just helps you to have a also common basis in your company if people are aware of the ethical assumptions, I say, like, or the ethical considerations that drive your decisions.
Yeah,
It's much easier for people to either bond or say, I disagree. So I think it really helps you create a stronger corporate culture. So
I like
that's
that.
really important. Yeah.
Yeah, because from a
Yeah.
like from a value point of view, even my organization is structured in different units, and every unit has kind of their own operational sense, profit, loss.
Mhm.
I don't even know how you say that from a business context, man. That's shining through. But in any case, they're responsible for their own operations in a sense. And then also we have discussions like what really defines us, like why do we exist in the first place, and what brings us together, right? And I think those questions is really gonna create kind of a camaraderie, and it's gonna bond us over a certain aspect that like we came together to solve a problem, right? And talking about what that is and what decisions get made and how we do those things, those approaches, I think those are ethical questions we're asking ourselves, but we go about it in a different way, right? Because we see a problem that as a consultancy company, you're more so spread out over different clients, but still we come together as a company and we say we are this company, and it needs to come like around a certain aspect, and asking ourselves what those aspects are and defining them, I think really helps in kind of forming that bonding.
Exactly. I mean, I can't believe it that we've been talking for like, I don't know, 10 or 20 minutes and haven't mentioned the word purpose yet. It's all about purpose.
Yeah.
So every company nowadays, of course, has to define their purpose. What legitimates or legitimizes our business? What problem are we trying to solve? What value do we add to the world?
Yeah.
And that's not just because of sustainability, but because also the younger generation, which you're I guess, part of it, but especially Gen Z, they have totally different expectations from their employers. They don't just go to a company that says, "Oh, we're producing, tools for the sake of producing tools, and we're trying to maximize our sales. We don't care who buys our tools and what they're doing with it and how our tools are created or where we source our metals from." You can't be indifferent to these questions anymore. So you need to have a purpose that kind of, is considered legitimate and attractive for your employees, but also for other stakeholders. And otherwise, you're not going to survive.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, like more so, that is a stronger feeling from a younger generation, right? And I can see that trend more and more even, but I don't know where that comes from. Like, is a younger generation more aware of what happens around the world, like because of social media or stuff like that? Why do you think that is more so like apparent within that younger generation, I guess?
I have no clue, but I mean, I assume if I were 20 today, I
Yeah.
would probably be glued to the road now and not do a podcast. I would probably be part of, sorry, let's be
No
honest, I
worries.
would probably be part of Extinction Rebellion or Last Generation or whatever they call themselves. I mean, I would be very worried because when I was 20, it was the 90s.
Yeah.
And it was after the end of Cold War and before 9/11. And this decade, like my 20s, like a large part of my 20s, it even looked like, at least in Switzerland and to a certain degree, as if like the really difficult questions had been resolved. It was capitalism that had won over communism, and we didn't have these two blocks anymore, and nuclear war was not a permanent threat anymore. So it looked like, okay, we have some issues with the environment,
Yeah.
but there was mostly nuclear threat or maybe acid rain, etc. But it was not this like systemic questions that we have nowadays that were not present. So if you're 20 now, it's by no means clear anymore that capitalism, the way we used to do it, like short-term, short-sighted capitalism, is doing us is the best option we have.
Yeah.
You realize that this short-sightedness has screwed up a lot of things, that we have wasted resources, that even though countries get richer and richer, to a certain extent, people don't get happier. There's a limit to the correlation between happiness and wealth.
Yeah.
And all these questions, I think it makes people much more sensitive. So I totally understand that they don't just want to think about questions of meaning and fairness in their private time, like
Yeah.
when they leave the factory at like 4 p.m., but they have like the intention and also the pressure to kind of make sense of their lives in an encompassing sense, also at work.
Yeah. And I think I like that kind of explanation or that train of thought, that the questions we have now about the world or our impact on the world or companies' impacts on the world, they're more so apparent now. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if they've always been there or just through the information sources we have, they're more like apparent in a way. I think that has a factor. But the fact that people are really just being introspective, looking at their lives and kind of the impact on the greater good, I think that's very healthy. And the more people do that, the bigger the change is going to be, because each individual change is going to add up. And you have to have faith to a certain degree that it does add up and that people will act accordingly. But yeah, that requires a lot of faith in that way.
Yeah, you're right. People are more introspective, and also social media, of course, plays a giant role.
Yeah.
Because when I talk about the 90s, maybe I only perceived it as unpolitical and peaceful because I didn't have all the information in real time all the time, on my smartphone popping up things like um, attacks against foreigners in Germany. Because I know, for example, in Germany, like neighboring country to Switzerland, the 90s were totally different than in Switzerland because they had like, post like the how to say, the reunion, etc. And they had a lot of issues there with racism, etc. And people who lived there had a totally different perception. But I was like, let's say 2,000 or like 1,000 kilometers away. I didn't know. I mean, I read about it in the newspaper
Yeah.
once a day, but there was no real time live reporting that could make me worry. So I think the constant flow of information now makes people much more aware.
Yeah.
And as you say, introspective, but I think there's also a danger, because it's hard to keep focus if you're overwhelmed by a steady stream of news. And as we know, where you move around, the platforms you choose, and the bubble you're in kind of shapes what you get to see. And it's not necessarily always a balanced and healthy environment for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. I usually describe myself sometimes, especially with Dutch media, as living under a rock. Like I have no clue what happens like on a TV sense. I don't have a TV anymore. And I don't know why that is, but I feel like not knowing about like smaller issues or like more on a day-to-day thing kind of thing makes me more happy because it filters out a lot of the noise. And I don't know if that was a conscious decision. That's just how it grew to be, I guess. But I do realize that if people are really glued to all the negativity, because apparently negativity sells, especially on news and stuff like that, then they kind of spiral, right? Because then they think everything is negativity and it's everywhere and there's just doom and gloom out there. And I do see that it can be toxic in that way as well. There needs to be a balance, and I think a healthy balance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same. Yeah.
But looking back more so to a business context, because we discussed what the ethics are and even the purpose in there, what I wonder is, because I've seen this online and also reading it, the topic of being ethically sound. And I don't know if there's a fine line, like someone can say, okay, this is ethically sound and this is not. But somehow a lot of articles still describe some things as being ethically sound. Like if you, in your consultancy assignments or working together with companies, do you define what is ethically sound, or do you allow people to define that themselves, or what's kind of your take on that?
Well, I definitely don't define that for my
No, that's what I was
clients. I mean,
thinking.
that would
Yeah,
be like the ethics dictator.
just gonna slam on the table, and
Yeah,
be like, "This
no,
is
no
nah."
way. Oh,
Yeah.
no way. No, I wouldn't want to do that. No, I think ethically sound for me has to do with integrity.
Mm.
And so that means that you must not permanently contradict yourself and violate your own values in your actions. So
Okay.
that's kind of in an integrated way. So ethically sound in a descriptive sense can be if your purpose of a company is like maximizing scale, efficiency, and speed.
Mm.
I would say, well, it's not ethically sound, but at least it's not really surprising if you also apply that principle to the way you deal with workers in supply chains. It's not ethically sound. It's
Yeah.
not something I like, but I could say it's what you expect from a company with these values.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's definitely more surprising or a bigger problem if you sell yourself as a highly aware company, dedicated to fairness and to whatever health and the environment, etc. And then you kind of don't live according to these values, neither in your day-to-day business within your own operations,
Yeah.
nor in your relation with your stakeholders. So that's on a corporate level. And like for people, for like individual people, ethically sound. What is ethically sound? It's like, of course, I could come up with different ethical theories, but I don't think they help in a corporate context. It's certainly what is in line with the purpose of the company and where you kind of at the same time stay true to yourself. And if you are in a company where the very purpose forces you to violate your own values on and on and again and again, you're probably not in the right company, or that's like it's not an ethically sound environment.
Yeah, I like that reasoning, because integrity, right, holding true to your values, either if that's a company or if that's a person, I think that makes a lot of sense. And all of a sudden, if you kind of cross that line, even for yourself, and reflect back on that, you're like, oh, that wasn't really like the right way, or I should have handled that differently, or I didn't expect that from myself, right? We already have the reasoning looking back and being like, oh, those judgment calls, those are not really who I am or who I want to be, right? Because you can still strive to be something you think is better at the end of the day. I think that kind of
Yeah,
defines then the ethically sound part. And it's not really black and white, right? It's very much malleable.
and also a company with the way they set incentives, they have a direct impact of whether you can act in an ethically sound way or
Mm.
not. So, for example, if you're being incentivized to kind of maximize sales no matter what,
Yep.
you will of course try to, that's what we had in financial crisis in the noughties, in the zeros, like 2008, etc. You're going to try to sell any financial product to just anyone, regardless of whether it is the right thing in light of their risk appetite and their personal situation. So this has a direct impact on your room, on your freedom
Yeah.
for like being ethically sound. If you're like on real pressure, or if you're like working in a company where you're like surveilled, like where there's algorithmic surveillance, you will probably not act ethically sound because you don't have room to deliberate about your actions. You're just driven by algorithms that judge your performance and your productivity all the time. And there is no space for genuine ethical behavior in such a highly automated context.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, one of the things you mentioned made me like triggered me into thinking about more so the time that we're facing now, or more so trending towards now. Because if I open my LinkedIn, and if I open someone else's LinkedIn as well, you see a lot of big companies, big tech companies laying off like thousands and 10,000s of people. All of a sudden, overnight, people get an email and don't even get to say goodbye to some aspect. And I'm just like, what is happening over here? Like, those are companies that I looked up to, and all of a sudden they flip the switch on you and they do something like that, which I don't know where that comes from, or how that kind of like, if that is in line with what you said, that people don't feel forced like this is the only option, or more so making decisions that they really like can't hold a candle to, I guess.
You mean those who fire the people,
Yeah,
whether they didn't have any other option? I mean, I can't really judge it, but
it's
I
hard,
think
right?
it's, yeah, but everything that happens with big tech, I mean, I'm in Switzerland, you're in Holland.
Yeah,
I don't think any of these procedures would be legal. The way that people are fired, I read about it on Twitter. Oh, just received an email, or just you couldn't enter my office anymore.
yeah,
I don't think that's legal in continental
no,
Europe. I think it mostly says something about the lack of employee protection in the Anglo-Saxon world or in the US.
yeah, yeah, I think so as well.
Um, yeah, but it's amazing because especially big tech has been very good at also creating a lot of immaterial value, or like driving up the valuations by selling their brand and their I think Google, for example, had a very strong reputation for a strong corporate culture with
Yeah,
a lot of extra benefits like free lunch for people and a ping pong table and whatever it takes. Now, hard times, out of here.
yeah,
I mean, I'd rather have less of a ping pong table, less of free lunch, and less of a family feeling maybe enforced upon me at work,
yeah,
but a more reliable and steady employer than just this like hire and fire overnight. I think that's
exactly.
a discrepancy that I perceive.
Yeah, and the fact that like sure countries can have rules and regulations against that, but the fact that you use that to your advantage in then like for your business culture and your context, that's a harsh one. Like that's a hard one.
Exactly. Suddenly, the law is your benchmark.
Yeah,
When before you would praise yourself for going way above the law with what you provide to your employees, how you treat them like family members, and you spoil them, and everyone was jealous of people working at Google with all these extra benefits.
yeah,
When it comes to firing, I mean, I can't really talk in detail about Google, but just what I perceive now. But when it comes to firing procedures, big tech just sticks to the bare minimum law. They don't make any effort
no,
from what I see to go beyond the law.
yeah, and like I mean, from an outside point of view, looking inside, like it looks really bad because first it was one company, then it's the other one. They're like dominoes, and they all do it kind of in a worse way. It feels like one tries to up the other one in making it like an even worse example to talk about, which I don't know
Yeah.
why. Right? If you see one company is doing it in a horrible sense, and you see a lot of people talking about it online, like obviously take a bit of nuance and take a bit of empathy and do it differently, right? You can still let go people because it's better for your business because of the context, but do it in a way that it doesn't either impact so many people, or the impact is so grave in that way.
It's actually pretty bad for ethics, I must say, now that you mention it. Because if I talk about corporate culture and how corporate culture really reflects on the ethics of a company, and you could say whatever you wanted about big tech, but a lot of them seem to have an attractive culture for employees in
Yeah,
certain regards. Of course, they've always been accused of, discrimination and sexism and racism. They're by no means innocent, but in many ways, they seem to be really good employers and creating a good environment for people. And then if all this is just like thrown overboard
yeah,
immediately, and the way they fire people does not reflect in any way the values that they used to have before, as I said before, kind of shows how fragile ethics can be when hard times come, when economic hard times come. It's like, are you willing to? Can you afford ethics in hard times?
Yeah.
Apparently, you can't. Or the way they did it,
Yeah.
they couldn't.
They couldn't.
It's not sustainable. The ethical model is not sustainable if it's only like a, how do you call it, a sunshine weather ethics, like that only
Only good
matters
times.
in good times. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's with all company values, right? You're going to have benefits and you're going to have secondary benefits and even benefits that are not really tangible, right? In the way people interact with each other, or like the simplest thing as a free lunch or something like that. But if shit hits the fan, if it's really bad times, then the things that still stand at the end of the day, I think those are your true company values, right? Because from an organization point of view, they can be like, okay, this is going to cost more, but this is the risk we're willing to take because this is who we are. And that is very powerful. If you stand by that, obviously, if you still make it at the end of the day as well, those are then your values and those are your ethics as well. Those are then not fragile, while the ones that fall and break, those I think might have been more of a, yeah, how do you say that? Like a mirage, I guess. It's a hard one.
It's like, one of the favorite terms across the last few years is like ethics or sustainability is in our DNA. No, if it's really in our DNA, you don't lose your DNA. When economics change, it's like, what have you been mutated with a CRISPR
modified.
gene? Like, have you been genetically modified? What's wrong with you? So I always say, I don't mind you being ethical and making money from being ethical, as long as you keep being ethical once you don't make money from being ethical anymore.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my saying. That's the litmus test. And so when the shit hits the fan, as you said, that's what's happening now.
Yeah. And I don't know how we're going to get out of this. It's just now that everything is online and everyone's seeing that, like, the reputational damage is just, I don't think they can really measure it, right? Because even people that are in the company are being scared for their job. People looking outside in, they're like, okay, it's not as good as I thought it would be. So they're going to have secondary thoughts even applying in that aspect. Like, the damage is huge. So was it then really worth it? I don't know. And I don't think I'm ever going to know, but I would like to know.
No, me neither. I mean, I must say, I'm also a bit confused at the moment because on the one hand, we have a huge shortage in qualified labor,
right?
Not just in Switzerland, also across the world. IT people, there's still a shortage, but apparently in Switzerland, big tech, because we have Google here, we have, I think, Facebook, Meta here in Zurich, etc. They have hired a lot of qualified labor and for wages that no SME in Switzerland could pay.
Yeah.
And so now, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. So on the one hand, we're having a shortage of labor. But on the other hand, you say the reputation is being damaged. I don't know how, supply demand, how that's going to work out now.
Yeah, me neither. But one of the final thoughts I had was, you laid out that in Europe, like, this most likely cannot happen, right? Because of the rules and regulations that are in place of the companies, or at least it would happen with a bit more nuance, right? With a due notice date and a few months in between and a severance package, right? Because those are kind of the rules and regulations we have within these countries, but not every country in that way is the same, right? And some countries, I think, based on just what they lay out as law, protect their people a bit more than, like, from a business context, right? If you have a business sense as an entity and the people that are then employed at that business, in this case, the employees have more benefits when it comes to, like, ethically being let go in that way. But not every country has that. Do you think we're trending more towards countries or even companies being more bounded by countries and guidelines in that way? Like, is it more strict and getting more strict, and in a good way for the people that are employed there? Where do you think it's trending?
Well, I'm really not an expert in employee protection, but I think the EU has their standards, and especially all the different countries in the EU have different standards.
Yeah.
I think France, for example, has probably much higher standards than, I don't know, saying Poland.
Okay.
I
sure.
assume, just assuming. But I don't know about trends. I think there are just new challenges that arise where you have gaps that have not been regulated, like with the whole gig economy. How do you deal with these workers that are not, like, permanently employed?
Yeah.
And new new work models, etc. So that's where there will be an impact depending on how you regulate that. It will be better or worse for people, but I don't know what the general trend is. You often read that things are getting more precarious. I don't think that employee protection is on the rise
No,
in general. No,
no,
I don't. No.
I think it's been set, and sometimes it's being reworked, and I think it sometimes needs reworking. I mean, due to COVID, a lot of people are working remote more so and more so. So Spain offers now like a digital nomad visa, which is interesting.
Right.
So something radical usually happens before you see a shift or a trend in a different way. But I think otherwise, it's just laid out and that's it. And you have those boundaries, and the companies play those boundaries to their best, even when there's a crisis. Which, yeah, I don't really know what to think of that, but that's what I've been seeing.
Yeah.
That's the hard part.
Yes.
And when it comes to tech and AI, I also don't know where it's trending, but the challenges that arise, like the more we do with AI, we already do a lot, and not a lot that you can see. ChatGPT was, I think, one of the first ones where a general population actually had access to something, and I think the impact was also enormous there. Where people could see like this is insane, and some people are afraid of their jobs also because of that. And then new challenges arise when it comes to plagiarism, like we touched upon earlier, that haven't been defined, right? And we're going to make a decision at some point, or a group is going to make a decision. And if that's right or wrong, we're not going to be either there to decide, or we can disagree or agree, but decisions are going to be made. And I don't know how it's going to trend in that way.
Yeah, I think the impact of ChatGPT is only just unfolding now because it
Yeah.
has been on the market now, accessible for everyone just for the past 2 months, and there was Christmas in between. But now I see everyone is using it. So I think the big decisions on whether ChatGPT makes certain people obsolete or certain jobs obsolete. This is just coming up in the future. But now, of course, when you read the stories, like I said, from CNET, where the creation of content with AI has led to inaccurate text, maybe that's also a warning signal that
Yeah.
will be taken seriously, etc. But I know that in other jobs, I think like mediocre copywriters, for example, don't really think you need them anymore. You have
No.
ChatGPT for the mediocre work, and then you have some professionals, experts that can turn mediocre content into really good content. That's where you need the humans.
Yeah.
But in many ways, I think, yeah, ChatGPT or like AI, like democratized AI, as they often call it,
Yeah.
like accessible for everyone, will really shake up the work environment,
Yeah. And
the labor market.
I hope
Yeah.
I hope a lot of roles evolve, like you mentioned, right? That they already have a head start, and then their job is to take it from 70% and turn it into a 99%, let's say, because 100 is always hard. I hope a lot of roles evolve and don't just become obsolete, because I think that's the harshest one, where someone all of a sudden brings out something and your job is obsolete and you have to do something completely else. I think
Yeah, I also hope
that's a
so. Of
different
course,
one.
yeah, obsolescence is really hard I mean, especially in a human context, shouldn't be used. Sorry.
Exactly.
No, but no, obviously, I mean, most people say that new job profiles will arise, but the challenge is to make them meaningful. As I said with the CNET example, if someone who has been trained as a journalist or sees himself or herself as a writer suddenly is like relegated to the human in the loop that's just reading the text that has been created by AI,
Yeah.
the meaning of
Yeah.
the job just kind of vanishes. And so how can we create meaningful jobs for people, or like make them evolve into meaningful positions?
I get what you mean. I think
Yeah.
that's going to be incredibly challenging, because because that's then more of a task than a job, I guess. That is new.
Mhm.
And sure, someone needs to do that task. But if that fulfills them in a way that it did before, yeah, if they identify as a writer, that's going to be a hard one, a real hard one. I've,
Also worried.
I've loved our conversation so far, having to do with ethics, purpose, and values. I think a lot of food for thought, and I'm going to really enjoy re-listening to this episode. Is there anything you still want to share with our audience before we leave off?
No, just thanks a lot for having me and for challenging me on an entirely different set of questions that I usually get. That's also your uniqueness. I really appreciate that.
Awesome.
I think I really my mind started boiling, which is always a good sign. And not easy to achieve. So thanks a lot.
No problem, no problem. When you were saying that, I was like, I hope in a good way. But I'm glad
In a
you
good
defined
way.
that.
It's good to feel a bit warm. It's cold outside. It's good to have some emotion, some signs of life. Very good.
Good stuff. Then we're gonna round it off here. Dorothea Baur, everyone. I'm gonna put all her socials in the description below. Check her out. Let her know you came from our show. And with that being said, thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next one.